Yeah, I
Excited.
think it's a go. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit right now. Me, Jola, and Peyton of the Fourth Radical. We are going to
Yep.
discuss how this new Supreme Court development is shaking up the race. So I just want to ask you, right, to start off, how are you feeling right now with politics in general?
Dude, I'm telling you, man, this has been a disaster all around. This whole past year has been so rough. Everything is swinging one way and another. You get, one piece of news, and then you get another piece of news, and then you get another piece of news. You thought that 2020 couldn't get any worse, and then there it goes. My first thought when I saw the notification that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away was, holy shit, things are really heating up. And also I did also take a moment to pause and think like, wow, this is someone who a lot of people really look up to. There's certainly a lot of criticisms that you can make against her. Certain of her rulings, especially against indigenous people, are not only questionable but wrong, entirely wrong. But she's someone who people really looked up to, and it felt like um, it was wrong for us in a certain way, or me. I almost felt a little bit guilty that suddenly and right away I was thinking about the politics of it, thinking about what's the electoral ramifications. Like we didn't even ever really get a moment to grieve. Mitch McConnell just hours after, I think it was like 2 hours after, putting out a notification basically saying we are going ahead with filling the Supreme Court vacancy. I mean, there's no time to grieve in this country because everything's all go, go, go. Everything's politics.
Yeah, everything really is political. And 2020, my friend made a really funny joke about it. I said it's like a video game that keeps on upgrading and throwing new stuff at us. Every time you get past a level, as you get closer to the main fight, which is this election, things get higher and higher stakes. And he said, well, the world decided, or the game developer of life right now, decided they needed to nerf the Supreme Court and make the Supreme Court less powerful with the latest update and make Supreme Court even, a bigger deal right now. So yeah, everything it just keeps happening, and I did a little bit of like a maniacal laugh when I heard that news because I'm like, oh boy, like it becomes so depressing and so messed up that eventually you have to just be like, oh well, there's another one. This is another issue we're gonna have going into November. And like you said, it was all made political because I guess it is political when you have a one of the most important parts of your government with positions that are lifelong until death or until someone steps down. And a lot of people were criticizing her for not dropping out when Obama was in office when the Democrats still had the Senate. I mean, yeah, you could criticize that, but now we are where we are, and we have to pay attention to what we could do moving forward. And judging by the Democrats' stances so far, Pelosi came out and said, although she has some tricks for the future, she is not going to do anything like hold up a budget to prevent a new justice from being certified to be on the court. So, what have you heard
Right.
so far?
So Nancy Pelosi came out saying that she's quote keeping all of her arrows in her quiver or whatever that means. Not being exactly clear what exactly they're going to do. Now, part of me thinks that this is because the Democrats don't know yet. I think that, given give them a week, right? Now I'm not optimistic, but I would say give them a week to figure out exactly what their strategy is. We're starting to see some hints of of how Joe Biden's trying to frame this. We know, for instance, COVID is a massive negative number for Donald Trump, right? Like the COVID numbers were terrible, terrible, terrible for Donald Trump. But the Supreme Court, even if overall the average American person sides with sort of the Democrats on the issue of the Supreme Court, doesn't think that we should fill it. It was the same way with Brett Kavanaugh. Ultimately, it's closer to a 50-50 issue than the COVID issue. So if you get voters thinking about the Supreme Court, it's going to no doubt help Donald Trump. And so Joe Biden has been trying to come out and frame the Supreme Court issue as an issue over COVID by linking it to the fact that there are rulings about the Affordable Care Act coming on the docket for the Supreme Court. And that's, this is obviously like a really big deal. Do you want to strip people of their health care in the middle of a pandemic via the Supreme Court? Sounds like a pretty dumb, stupid thing to do. And so trying to link those two together so that the issues don't become too divorced and separated is probably a smart move, specifically out of the Joe Biden campaign. I mean, none of this is like brilliant, sort of maneuvering, but it's definitely all last minute. Like, what do you expect them to throw together within? I think they already are running ads on that, but like, what do you expect them to throw together within a matter of 2 days? When it comes to Nancy Pelosi specifically, yeah, I wish that we heard a little bit more vocal saying, like, this is the thing that we're going to do. On the other hand, though, the Democrats really only leverage here are the kinds of obstruction that you're mentioning. Maybe obstruction is probably the wrong word here, but saying, for instance, we're going to hold up the budget, or maybe we'll even launch an impeachment investigation over the postmaster general or something like that, in that impeachment should take precedent over a Supreme Court pick to basically, clog up the Senate timeline until inauguration day, because it's very likely that a lame duck appointment will be what happens if Joe Biden wins. I wouldn't hold it past Republicans at all.
So, just historically speaking, when it comes to party lines, Republicans almost all the time care about the Supreme Court more than Democrats. And now Democrats actually care about it more than Republicans. I mean, they should have cared about it for a while. It's a pretty big deal in our country, but I guess they're finally coming around due to this moment. I have some numbers of different polling on if a new Supreme Court justice should be confirmed before the election. So, a poll
Hmm.
just got done right before RBG's passing that said 67% of respondents believed confirmation should proceed in 2020, and this is what all the right wing sources are going with. The New York Post, what's the site? The Blaze or something. All these right wing sources are going off this poll, but this happened before her death, and after her death, we are seeing a big shift. So now, in this new poll from Reuters, 62% of Americans said the vacancy left by Ginsburg, who died Friday, should be filled by whichever candidate wins the upcoming election. So there is a big shift here. Only 23% said that we should not wait until after the election. The other polls I saw, there was one taken by YouGov, I think, right after her death, and it said that 51% said it should not take place until after the election. So we have those numbers. I guess it depends what the Democrat strategy is to politicize this and use it to their advantage moving forward, and if the Republicans have a good counter to it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the majority of the country indeed opposes filling the vacancy right away. I think I saw a poll from the Hill like one day after saying that it was only about 51 or something percent of the country. But hearing that 62% number sounds about where I would expect it to be. But again, we also need to keep in mind Kavanaugh was a net negative as well, but it likely helped them in the Senate. And I don't think that that's going to be any different this time around, given the fact that the Senate seats which are vulnerable this time around are specifically Senate seats which are red, which have been tilting blue because of Donald Trump and because they have high suburbs. They have a lot of suburbs, and those are the countries that are moving over. And so, energizing the base of former Republicans who have just recently, are just recently starting to move over to the Democratic Party on the basis of a kind of Supreme Court vacancy, that's something which can really, it's certainly the Achilles heel of Joe Biden, given how he set up his campaign strategy around those fickle Republicans, that was going to be the voter base that he was going to be really targeting, right? We know that he came out trying to target the moderates, trying to target those suburban voters who were former Republicans. We all remember Pete Buttigieg's famous line that he was going to be targeting the future former Republicans, that was his demographic group of choice. And it seems like Joe Biden as well is trying to usher in that era for the Democratic Party. And so this is a specifically a very vulnerable area for Joe Biden, because this is, he hasn't been making the grounds that we would need to see in the Latino community or in or among progressives that he would need. And so he ultimately is going to be relying on those swing moderate voters. I don't know that he has time to turn around ship this late in. And so having a blow to that demographic specifically could be really bad for him. On the other hand, though, we also need to keep in mind that we just saw massive record-breaking fundraising numbers after Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing. On Saturday, we saw an eye-popping $70.6 million being donated to the Democratic Party, which is a Democratic Party record by a long shot. We saw, of course, last month, in the month of August, we saw over $360 million going over to the Democratic Party. $70 million is, I think, like something, what, about one fifth of that. And so, I mean, you're talking about a significant amount of money raised in a single day. Now, we can talk campaign finance reform and all of that, but we also need to be understanding the fact that Donald Trump right now is completely bankrupt. His campaign is struggling. They were pulling ads during the course of the DNC. That's not something that you do if you have a lot of money in your campaign. Donald Trump is really struggling to make money, and no doubt that that is really affecting his ad choices. How is he going to campaign if he's running out of money in the states that he needs to get?
Yeah, I think the fundraising doesn't matter when it comes to numbers per se, because in 2016 Hillary outspent him. I think it was 2.5 to 1.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, so I think it does matter though that the money is coming from people, because that shows how energized your base is. And the Democrats, as we know, they're not energized behind Joe Biden. So I feel like this is actually a good shot in the arm for the Democrats. And when it comes to Pelosi and Schumer and what steps they want to take moving forward, I would prefer, for the sake of getting Biden to get Trump out, I would prefer they take a hands-off approach, because I think they are so bad at politics that no matter what they try to do, I think it's going to be a public opinion nightmare. I think it's better to just say there's only 40 days till the election. Most Americans think we should wait until there's a new president to pick a new justice, and make Trump look like an a-hole pounding it right through, and make McConnell look terrible pounding it right through before the election. And there's different ways that could play out. You have to think, like, which party is this bigger bait for? I think Trump's capabilities have been pretty expended when it comes to energizing his base. But the point you made with the suburban voters is pretty interesting when it comes to, like, how pro-life are they? Do they really care about getting the Supreme Court justice to be very conservative, or do they want, or do they not care as much about that issue? Is the main issue still getting Trump out of office? And on the other side, is this Supreme Court scare going to get a lot of people on the left out that were not going to come out and vote for Biden before? Or is it getting people who weren't, that energized to make sure their vote counts? Because I know we're having a lot of issues with mail-in votes, early voting, and the ballots that are going to be collected in November. So I want to see how it's all coming together when it comes to energy, when it comes to how many people are going to show up on election day, when it comes to how it's going to play in the media, who could look good out of this and who could look bad. And I think Donald Trump, let him do whatever he wants to do. He cannot restrain himself. I think restraining himself would actually work in his favor in this instance, but I don't trust that he would ever do anything like that in his life, honestly.
Yeah, I highly doubt it. And given the fact, and honestly, we need to keep in mind this long-running story of Donald Trump's presidency ultimately is weakness, in the sense that you think about the things that Donald Trump was able to do. It's either the things that he was given in the past unilateral power in the executive branch to do and take action on, and even then he saw insubordination from a number of military generals who did not want to follow Donald Trump's orders, or the things that he was able to pass were things, for instance, like the tax cuts, which were typical Republican things that they wanted to do anyway. And so he ended up, the only areas where he had power at were the traditional Republican areas. So I don't think that Donald Trump would be able to stand up against someone like Mitch McConnell, who has said openly that his number one goal, and or I should say that his number one, well, I don't remember the exact word, something along the lines of like his number one thing, that the thing that he's most proud of is the fact that he had jammed through the Merrick Garland, blocked the Merrick Garland case, and then jammed through Gorsuch, right? And so, and used it to leverage the election in 2016, right? And so, this is something that is a lifelong mission for Mitch McConnell. And if Mitch McConnell decided to oppose Donald Trump, I think Mitch McConnell would be ultimately the one who would prevail in a fight like that. And I think that when we talk about this, we need to talk about the senators who are Republicans who might not be willing to go along with this. Of course, we know, for instance, that I think, was it Lisa Murkowski who came out today saying that she would not go forward with this. We also saw Susan Collins, who's in a very vulnerable position. Mitt Romney apparently behind closed doors, possibly saying that he wouldn't be willing to go through with this. So it's going to be a really tough one for Mitch McConnell also, right? Like, people saying that this is a foregone conclusion that it's going to go through. It's not clear to me that that's certain, at least before the election, possibly after in a lame duck session. I think it's more likely than before the election. Notice both Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski saying before the election, not saying before the inauguration. So I do have a question in my chat, if you don't mind. Leftism Shark, hey, how's it going? Is asking, interested to know how the DNC fundraising after Ruth Bader Ginsburg compares to the DNC fundraising after Lafayette Square. I see upper middle class liberals ready to riot over SCOTUS after condemning Black Lives Matters protesters for vandalism. Yeah, so like we were saying earlier, the fundraising for Ruth Bader Ginsburg is significantly more than after Lafayette Square. You're right there that that is a little bit curious that they're much more worried about the Supreme Court than they are about or their concerns when it came to Black Lives Matter protest and how they were like, definitely not. They were shaky or worried about those protests. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, on the ground, there's pretty equal concern. Definitely that is the case online when it comes to like Twitter or Facebook. A lot of people that weren't concerned about fixing the issues behind the riots are now concerned about this. Um, it's an interesting issue to me because I would say it's because this is something that directly affects them. But when it comes to Supreme Court decisions that could happen, obviously Roe v. Wade is a big one that affects everyone. But when it comes to LGBT rights, when it comes to different decisions, I'm not sure who feels the impact directly as a result of that. Maybe it's a morality thing, why they care more. I'm trying to pinpoint in my head where that could be, but coming back to what you were talking about with the Senate votes, even if we got a tie, it obviously goes and the VP will just flip it over anyway. So I think there's a good chance. I mean, I could ask you your prediction too, but I think there's a good chance there is a new justice before election day. So do you agree with that? And if they do push one through, do you think it'll play good or bad for them?
Um, I think that it's going to come in the lame duck session after. If it does come, I mean it's very possible. And this is something that's so up in the air, and I think it's so fast moving that I honestly could have another opinion within 3 or 4 days. Right. So don't hold me to this. But what I'm thinking right now is that it's more likely that we're going to see something after election day. That we're probably going to see the hearings. We're going to see everything all set up on election day, and then they're going to claim something along the lines of, well, let's let the voters see, and then they're honestly just going to jam it through regardless. Because look, if Cory Gardner, who's on the rails, who is on the rails in Colorado, probably either the most vulnerable or the second most vulnerable behind Susan Collins, he's been, I think, to my knowledge, quiet about this so far, but I think that he's probably going to be he wants to get this court pick through. My guess though is that if he's on the way out and he knows he's on the way out, I think he'll just vote for it. Same with Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski's, I think, a different story. She's not quite as vulnerable, but point being, I think that we're probably going to see it after the election. Not to mention, I think we need to think that like last time around in 2016, I think that Republicans actually could stand a lot to gain by dangling out this for as a sort of prize for Republican voters, pretending like, oh well, we're not going to do it unless, but then running through and doing it. Well, they probably won't say that. They probably won't say that they won't confirm. They'll probably dodge the question after the election. But my guess is that McConnell would be completely shameless and would just jam it through anyway.
That's what I was saying
Someone's
about.
asking us
Oh,
our
yeah, you go.
someone's asking us our political beliefs. I'm curious to know how you consider yourself politically. I know it's a tough base, your whole politics around a single denomination, but still, and Colonel Phillip, you are saying that you're an anarchist. I'm some kind of socialist. I probably can't. I couldn't tell you what stripe. I'm stripe. If you're an anarchist, though, you should know that we do hold a book club every Wednesday at 7:30, 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. So if you're interested in that, we are reading Kropotkin's The Conquest of Bread, Peter Kropotkin. So I don't know if you want to share your political views publicly or if that's too controversial or explosive.
No, I would consider a further reaching ideology like you guys are talking about, but I would just say left libertarian because I operate just purely in the now and how I could operate to be the most realistic pursuer of goals today. I feel like those are good goals for tomorrow, but when it comes to today, I'd probably align as a social democrat working within our democracy or a left libertarian if I was going independent. I don't stand by late, although I might agree with a lot of your guys' conclusions as anarchists and socialists. I would rather stay in like what is right now the pressing issue and what can I operate as right now.
Yeah, I'd say that's really fair. Like a lot of people, here's the thing about socialism, right? Like socialism, there haven't ever really been outside of the Soviet Union and outside of countries that have actually been socialist. I should say in the United States specifically, there's never been a socialist contingency which gained enough power to actually truly define themselves. This is what socialism means. And then if you don't believe these specific things, then you're not quite socialist. I mean, we see people try to do things like that on Twitter, but there's really no consensus and no agreement. So, when it comes to something like the United States, I think that socialism can mean a lot of things. That's why when Bernie Sanders came out and described himself as a democratic socialist, and a lot of people were criticizing him for that, at least people on the left saying, well, you're actually more of a social democrat. I was kind of like, well, first of all, what is socialism? I mean, it's not been clearly defined in specifically the United States. In other countries, sure. But secondly, more importantly, my view on that was always like, I mean, if the dude says he's a democratic socialist, he's probably a democratic socialist. Like, it's not like he doesn't know the meaning. And besides, democratic socialists have often held the view that, the goal is essentially to hijack one of the major parties. You drive in with social democrat policies, and then you sort of belt and switches and levers to derail capitalism from there. So my view on it was that, if he says he's a democratic socialist, he's probably a democratic socialist. Like, just sort of assume that way.
Yeah, when it comes to where his conclusions are, definitely he aligns with that. But he operated as a social democrat. I think in his second run, he got into more socialist policies when it came to like, he wasn't ever coming out and yelling like, we will decommodify our entire nation and I will take national control of Google. Like, he was never doing stuff like that. He did say we should make utilities like the internet, like electricity, or like whatever he said, everything should be like utility wise should be owned and operated by the people. But he didn't run as a socialist, I don't think. I think he kind of did what I do, and he's like, okay, let's fit everything what I can affect in this system right now instead of worrying about where my theory goals lie in the future. I think it gets really skewed as well when it comes to people who call themselves socialists, because I see a lot of people online who will post something saying AOC isn't a real ally to the movement, although she has done more for left policies in the U.S. or left movements in the U.S. Than a lot of figures in American history. And then I see in the comments, like, we should really take a better look at China and the USSR. And I'm like, not only is that politically incapable with what's happening today, the American public would never have a real discussion about that. But when you're basing your like ideology off authoritarian governments, and you have like a certain percentage of socialists saying that, then you have some socialists who are more libertarian. I don't like that one umbrella word for everything because I feel like it could be so construed, and I don't want people to be able to put me into a direct box as a result of other people saying stuff. Because, I mean, you probably get that a lot. Like, other people say, I'm a socialist, this is what it means for me. And then you talk to somebody who heard that, and they think what socialism meant to somebody else is what that meant for you. So I don't know if you've ever had issues with that or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like, you can't take everybody who's online. You can't take them all serious. Like, I mean, take it in, listen to what people are saying, try to be open-minded, but, you can't, like, people are going to disagree, and when it comes to the internet, anybody can say anything. So it's hard to always tell, like, who should be the people you should be taking seriously. So it's definitely a bit of a mess. I didn't mean to derail us from our conversation about the Supreme Court, though, if you wanted to.
No, talking about politics is fun. I don't really care what the topic
Yeah.
is. But yeah, we were just talking about what it would take to prevent one from being confirmed, from a new justice from being confirmed. And I was about to say, I think Trump would benefit from not putting a justice in because of what you said. Hold out that meat for the base. Like, okay, I did not put someone in. If you don't elect me, then the Democrats will put someone in. That should be the goal. If Trump puts a conservative judge on the court, I feel like it makes those conservatives that are voting for Biden more comfortable, especially if he picks someone that conservatives like. You may think, like, I think a lot of people would say, okay, he picked a reasonable conservative. That'll get more conservative voters, more Republican voters. But I think that'll actually make them more comfortable with picking Biden because they know he's not going to pick someone who is pro-choice. He's not going to pick someone who will overturn, who, like, when... I'm sure if there's a huge majority on the court, Alabama, certain states like Alabama, Missouri, I forget which ones came together before, but they will force it, whatever they want, to the Supreme Court, and they will have a good shot at it. So I think, honestly, if Trump shows restraint, it'll work out for him better.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like I was saying though, I don't know how much of a say Donald Trump is really going to have in it. Honestly, like I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be up to Mitch McConnell. It's going to be up to the Senate Republicans and
Yeah,
how
he's a
they.
puppet.
Yeah, right. And how Mitch McConnell feels, and I know Mitch McConnell obviously wants to push it through. The question, though, I think is going to come down to how the respective senators feel is going to impact their election bid, and whether or not they're willing to make that sacrifice. For a lot of Republicans, they were told from the get go, from a very young age, that this is basically the number one thing. I mean, genuinely, look, you can criticize people for being dishonest actors, for sort of swaying their beliefs here and there, but they have some kind of beliefs in some general direction, obviously, right? Like they have some things that they actually really do care about. Why else would they have actually gotten into politics? Now, the things that they care about are, in my view, oftentimes disgusting. But in the case of I think Cory Gardner actually. I was mentioning him earlier. I was trying to think of another example, but I think Cory Gardner is probably the best example of someone who, look, he doesn't want to lose re-election, but I actually think that he would lay down for the possibility of getting through another justice, thinking to himself, well, this will last for a couple decades. I'll be gone soon anyway.
Yeah, that's
So,
interesting
if
considering
Cory
that.
Gardner,
Yeah, when you look at people like Susan Collins, she obviously has a lot of pressure from moderate Democrats that she needs to get reelected. I don't know much about Murkowski, and we already know Romney was the only Republican to vote to impeach, to get Trump out of office once the impeachment went through from the House and hit the Senate. Do you know anything about the status of Murkowski at all? Was that today that they came out?
uh, yeah, I believe that came out
Okay,
today.
so that puts, if Romney does come out, that's a tie, right? I
I
think.
think so. Yeah, I think that what would that be? Because that's Susan Collins, Romney, Mikowski. Um, so that's three. They have 53. But the big one is going to be Mark Kelly and Martha McSally in Arizona, right? So
Yeah.
basically, Martha McSally is there. It's basically a special election, and Mark Kelly is ahead in the polls anywhere between 12 and 17 points, about averaging in at 15 points. So he's almost certain to win, unless, of course, this massive shakeup is enough, which it doesn't look like it's going to be to offshoot something like that. But because it's a special election, Mark Kelly will be seated, as long as all the votes are counted, will be seated by the end of November. And so that could be a situation where they basically lose a seat, which is the only hiccup I was mentioning there, that my view could change about when this happens. That's my only sort of hiccup about this, because if McConnell knows that Martha McSally is going to lose and that he can't get it through regardless, that's the only thing that would make me think that McConnell would just try to jam this through before election day, even if it means that it'll possibly, they won't, that Trump won't have that to wave in front of his base. Um, so it's really, I think, going to come down to Romney. I hate saying that, right? Because I'm not like, there's so much Romney praise online. I don't know if you've seen it, and it's just kind of like annoying. It's like, dude, look, I'm glad that you voted on impeachment, but like, I'm not like a fan of you. But at the end of the day, it looks like Romney's the only one who's a possibility, who hasn't actually come out and said anything yet. So
Yeah, the Romney love is, it is in real life and
very,
online. It's very real. It's not it's not like a lot of the things we talk about that we only see on like Twitter, sometimes Facebook. But the Romney love definitely is good. So yeah, when it comes to RBG, I wanted to go into your views a little bit on her entire career. Do you know anything about her early career in law and moving up to the Supreme Court? Do you agree with a lot of the criticisms you see, like online on like Twitter and everything? And do you think people are justified to say, like, I saw a lot of posts, and I usually don't care about these little fringe comments, but
mm.
these tweets had like 50,000, 100,000 likes. So what do you think about the people saying, like you said about the pipeline stuff, like she was too hard on criminal justice? What do you think about the people saying her entire legacy should be discredited?
um, I think, honestly, I think that's like just kind of ridiculous. Like, people, especially people from the past. Like, you look at any historical figure, you're never going to find someone who you like and who was perfect. And honestly, I suspect that most of us are going to be criticized as well for not being vegetarian and the like into the future as, vegetarianism moves forward and animal rights activists move forward. It'll be seen as how could you have supported something like the meat industry and the like. There's my very controversial take for the day. So I think that we need to take things in piecemeal. Look, she did terrible decisions when it came to indigenous people. Not at all. I mentioned that at the very beginning of our stream. Not at all acceptable. They're disgusting decisions using essentially the same justifications that Columbus used in order to justify taking lands from indigenous people. Some of her voting on environmental reforms are questionable. That said, though, I don't think that I don't think that like there's any reason to think that you can't like take that in piecemeal and say, well, she did good things here, she did bad things here. Um, is rating with a party of 7? Okay, okay, sorry. I guess Chris Frederick is rating my stream. I did not realize that. I thought he sent a message there. Anyway, um, that confused me for a second there. Um, I totally lost my train of thought. What was I saying? I'm sorry.
Um, you said about indigenous people.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, basically, I think that you can take it in piecemeal. Look, so people have good sides, people have bad sides, and I think that she did a lot to advance the cause of women's rights. She did a lot of work to convince the justices of the court to include protections of women in various kinds of Title IX, both Title IX defenses, but also other kinds of just equal rights protection and clauses, adding extra levels of legal scrutiny to issues of gender equality, showing that this is a real issue at the time when the rest of the court was all male. And so I don't think that we should take that lightly. But yeah, I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to be honest about someone's mistakes while simultaneously admitting that, you know, that they did good things as well.
Yeah, I think this is where the left got berated for being too about purity during the primary. Although that's a very small section of the left, it is completely true with a decent amount of people. And RGB as an individual served a key role in creating some of the most important change in American history when it comes to gender discrimination, LGBT rights, voting rights. She was one of the first people to officiate a legal same-sex wedding. I'm pretty sure. Her career in law is really amongst the most impressive in American history. And if you're going to label her like a woman born in the 1930s as not progressive enough because she doesn't fit your like exact dogma, your mentality really isn't very useful in the
Well, the,
political
the other thing we
arena.
also need to consider, the other thing we also need to consider is that she is working in the constraints of the law. It's not
Yeah.
like, look, it is the case that in many respects the court is politics by other means, right? It's not the case that like the law is some external body which comes down and tells you. I mean, look, it's not some brilliant council of elders. It is the case that you can disguise just about most political ideologies in kind of legal frameworks or legal arguments. But it is also the case that your methods for legal evaluation do constrain the choices which are possible to you. We oftentimes forget that the majority of the decisions written under the Supreme Court are not those split decisions. We only hear about the split decisions because, by definition, the split decisions are the ones that are controversial, right? And so, but again, the majority of what the court does is strike down laws or strike down sentences which are flagrantly unconstitutional, which is very, very different. And so the court is able to come to general conclusions on a lot of things. And so again, the law does constrain your actions in many respects. And so sometimes you can criticize someone for making some legal ruling when honestly you should really be criticizing the law itself. As opposed to just criticizing the person, and that's a level of nuance that I don't think that a lot of people are really interested in having.
Yeah, she's a center left legal professional. She isn't a party ideologue. If she
Right, and
was,
she isn't far left either. She isn't far left. She,
no.
she for a long time she was basically like pretty center. She was left of center.
And she wouldn't be
But then
on the
she did
court
start.
without that. Like Bill Clinton never puts
Right,
her on the court if she doesn't, if
right.
she is a crazy
You're not
radical or
gonna get a
something.
right. You're not going to get a socialist or communist legal professional. Like those people, those people exist, but they're not going to go on the court until you get an actual. socialist in office or something like
Yeah,
that,
like I saw
right?
people criticizing her up to this point, and I said something about her being what, an 87-year-old woman from the 1930s, and someone said that's not even a good point. But when you're looking at how generations develop, and you look at like where she came from, she is damn progressive for the era that she came from, being that pro LGBT, and as a woman rising up, I think that matters to a great extent. If you look at her like career, she got denied so many positions on the basis of being a woman. Like she had one of the best endorsements from one of the most prestigious law officials. In sorry, I just got a notification. 1 second. One of the most prestigious law officials in the country. She had a recommendation from them, but still got turned down from working under the Supreme Court. I forget which justice at the time, but because she was a woman, her first ever teaching job at a law school at Columbia, I believe, or something of that nature. She got denied equal pay because they said she had a husband making good money. Therefore, she didn't deserve to make uh, good money there because she already had a
Right, right.
husband taking care
Oh,
of her.
she didn't need the money or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Right, like,
exactly.
yeah, look, the fights that she had and that shaped her, informed her, were different than the fights that we're having right now, and we need to be honest about that. However, guys, don't also think that that's not a limitation on the court, because we're talking about a court that's really full of really, really old people making decisions about laws today. And if you're not like, I think that it's perfectly reasonable to be honest about that and say,
Hmm.
hold on, does that make a whole lot of sense in today's world, especially where things are moving really, really quick? So I think that, look, if you're going to make those kinds of criticisms, I think that you should make them at the institution. Trying to make criticisms of people, like, you know, you can do it, right? It makes sense. I do it sometimes, but I do think that you should always try to be careful with it and always explain how these actors come to be in the first place, right? The concerns that you have are almost never concerns about the actual person, because if that person was gone, it would have been another person doing the exact same thing, right? And so talking about institutions, honestly, I think is pretty important.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. And she wasn't amazing on criminal justice, on law and order. She did go to the right on that topic, but I don't disagree. I don't agree with people saying like, "Oh, we're really supposed to be bad about this old racist white lady dying." But like, come on, like I don't call just because she wasn't very vocal in like the civil rights movement. I don't know if that's really a judgment on her character. She was just for the law and for, anti-discrimination. And even if she had a couple legal positions that you disagree with on the basis of law and order, maybe it's not contingent with like reality when it comes to what the rules should be that foster a positive environment. Although you don't agree with her on that, you do, like you said, you have to look at the institution, you have to look at the nature of the profession. Even when it came to the indigenous people, that she,
right.
what are you gonna say?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, like, the law has built into it neoliberal societies, built into it distinctions which are designed to protect capital.
Yeah.
For instance, various kinds of distinctions of public and private. These distinctions exist in very peculiar ways, which are carved specifically, ways in which which exist specifically to protect capital. For instance, the fact that the state rules in every single economic transaction is thought of the state is essentially thought of as distinct entirely from the economy in the legal profession. These are all questions that are disputed among legal scholars of other stripes. But to be a judge, you have to think about the law in a very specific way. And so I do think that we need to talk about pushing the actual law and not being so concerned with these non-democratic governing bodies that rule over us. I think that, and maybe we can move to this angle of the conversation, Joey. But I honestly think that when it comes to the Supreme Court, we should try to not only depoliticize the Supreme Court, but also move to maybe reduce its importance a little bit. I mean, look, the Supreme Court, like we were saying earlier, the majority of the stuff that the Supreme Court does is overwhelming majority decisions because something is flagrantly unconstitutional, it's flagrantly violating the law. Um, but maybe we should give more deference to our governing and democratic bodies, perhaps requiring, for instance, Supreme Court decisions to be supermajority, so that way, when things get strike down, which again is the majority of what the Supreme Court actually does, it's a majority. It's like a clear majority decision, like, oh, this is definitely unconstitutional. You definitely can't do that. And giving a little bit more deference to the democratic bodies. I just want to say thank you real quick to I guess your name is All Life Matters. Thank you so much for the follow. Thank you for the follow. Yeah, I don't know what you think about that. This may be a bit controversial. What do you think about court packing, though? I think that that's the one that's on. You can hit all of those at once, but court packing is the big one right now.
On what you said about a supermajority, I'm not sure how much I agree with that because if you look through history, a lot of the best decisions for people by the court have been 5-4 splits, have been, uh, well,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know how I feel about that because if you have all far right judges, you're saying goodbye to human rights for another, until they decide to pack the courts, which is another good conversation. I saw a solution on Twitter today that said like we should add a certain number of seats every X number of years, so it's less political. Just whoever's in power adds those seats. So like maybe two for every term or something like that. For every term a president serves, so it's a little bit less of a political football. It's a
Yeah,
little bit less locked in place.
I'm 100% in favor of rotating the judges. I do think that we need to ultimately move to depoliticize the court. Now, I want to be clear when I say that, that doesn't mean that the court is in some sense less political because it's always going to be political, but making it in a certain way less partisan, making it so that, when an 87-year-old who's been sick for years dies, it doesn't turn the whole country into turmoil. That doesn't make any sense. Like if you're an alien looking down at the American governing institution, you're going to be like, what the frick designed this? That's just dumb. That's just stupid. So I think that we should think about ways in which we could move away from that. And I do agree with court packing it to start to balance it. But I think that the way to sell that to the American people is to move it to a debate about, look, we should just have rotating judges. Like you have judges, and every single president gets to pick maybe two or three judges every single 4 years or something like that, and then you just rotate them out and then they retire. Remove the idea of appointments for life, and then have it be a kind of rotating system. I think that that would be a way to appeal and make it more clear that, hey, look, when we pack the courts, we're not just doing this for our own partisan games, because then we could end up in a situation like Poland, where their top court ends up just being basically an arms race, where both actually, they have more than two parties, but where each party, every single time they get power, just adds more judges to the court, so that then they can just, we're now in Poland, they have well over 100 judges, I think, at this point, to their top court, and that happened in a very quick time frame. Once one group decided doing that, it's not like humans in America are any different than humans in Poland. That could happen in America too. And I think that the best way to do that, and also to sell it to the American people, is turn around and say, actually, we're just going to do this in a fair way. We're going to make it a rotating system, and remove the idea of appointments for life. Obviously, that's going to require a constitutional amendment, but I honestly think that um, that's a better way, I think, to sell it and to do it, as opposed to just having these massive upheavals and massive explosions every single time someone dies. I think just objectively it seems irrational. Also, I do want to make one other quick point about court packing. A lot of people think that this is just something that benefits Democrats. Guys, keep in mind, if votes were just a little bit different, just a little wee tiny bit different in 2016, Hillary Clinton would have won, and we would be looking at the reverse situation where Democrats would be taking over the Supreme Court. And honestly, we'd probably be hearing court packing arguments coming from Republicans right now, if just the world, and I imagine in some possible universe out there, that's the world that we're living in, where Republicans are talking about the issue of court packing, and it very well could be in a couple decades where court packing could be a Republican positive issue. So I think that in the long run, having the rotating judges situation avoids that disaster situation of Poland, where it's just an Armageddon's race of filling the Supreme Court with as many seats as possible. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah, I think a good standard for like how long one judge should serve or one justice should serve is I would say like what we consider one generation of adults. So maybe you could only stay in for like 18 years, maybe 20 years. As every baby born that year will be 18 in 18 years, like as they're in there. When it comes to power delegation, and that's essentially what we're talking about when it comes to adding more House members, adding more justices. When it
Mhm.
comes to House members, if our numbers of representatives kept up with our population when we first created our legislature, we would have literally 9,000 House members right now if it kept up. We need
Yeah.
way more House members. We need way
Yes.
more Supreme Court justices.
9,000 is too many for an effective governing body. There's
Yeah.
actually some interesting research about how many you can really have. You'd have to end up having multiple houses, like a bunch of different houses, and then they'd have to, send delegates and come together. That'd be the only way to have a delegation as large as 9,000 on the national level. But yeah, we absolutely need to expand the number of seats. There's actually legitimate pretty good empirical research out there suggesting that we should have maybe about 1,500 members of Congress if we want a little bit more effective democracy. Now, obviously, some of that research is shaky. The methodology around social science is always really difficult. But in general, yeah, we should anywhere between double and triple the number of seats that we have, and bring down the numbers. And by the way, Joey, you're not just right to say that if the numbers were the same as when our country founded. Let's keep in mind, for many many years of our country, I think almost like 60, what is it, 70 years of our country, they kept on adding seats every single time we had a census, but then they just capped it off because they realized, oh wait, this would mean that we're going to have to build another Capitol building. We just built a Capitol building, right? Because the chamber wasn't large enough, and so they were like, well, we can't have like tons and tons of chamber buildings. It would end up being too expensive, which is kind of fair, right? So they just capped it off, and they haven't essentially changed it since. So yeah, it's definitely time to expand that and have more locally representative governments. I mean, you're representing, will be after this 2020 census likely over 1 million people per representative. I mean, can you have actually a close democracy when you're representing 1 million people? Like, really? Like, no, you can't. So, yeah, 100% agree with you there.
Yeah, we need more, but like you said, we can't have too many. There's a good mix between representation and function of a government, and there actually is. I mean, if we added more seats, the government might function better because we have things so locked in now. It's really
It'd be
amazing.
harder.
Yeah,
I
you
say
go.
it'd be harder for money. I was just going to say a quick remark. I say it would be harder for money to come in and influence all those extra seats. I think that it would just in general make for a more responsive government.
Yeah, and that's like you could say that's sort of a thing a lot of people that are like socialist want when it comes to like even worker co-ops. You want more democracy, more delegation wherever you can. It's harder to corrupt it. Like you said, it's harder for money influences to gain control of literally every house seat or whatever. We would see more independent representatives. When it comes to adding seats, I do like the model that South Korea uses, where they have a regular per like district mark as we do, but they also have seats that are reserved for a national party vote. So sort of how a parliamentary system chooses how many seats are awarded to each party. So like in
Yeah.
our country, if we added 100 of these extra seats, then if the Green Party got 4% of the vote, then they would get 4 seats on it. If the Libertarians got 10%, then they would get 10 seats on that extra
Yeah.
body. So maybe
I
that's the
support
solution
as
for it.
well. Well, I support that as well. I would support a either. Well, so there's two different things, approaches which I would support. I'd have to research more between deciding between the two. Either a unicameral kind of parliamentary system, right, where it's essentially one parliament. If you have 50% of the vote, and you vote by party, sort of basically the British system, the UK system. I'm actually a pretty big fan of the UK system, where it's just like an entirely unilateral parliament. They can, with 51% of the vote, completely reverse just about any decision, right? Pretty big fan of the UK Parliament. The other approach that I would support is something like a bicameral system, like we have right now, except not with the Senate. You'd essentially have the upper house be what we would call the House of Representatives today, and then the lower house be essentially what you were describing there, where you vote by party. And I would have it be the case that the prime minister of the vote by party case body would be third in line for the presidency. Either that, or I would abolish the presidency, because there are some issues with having, in our American system, where you have essentially the head of state also representing the also being like the executive as well. Like, I think that the foreign affairs should be handled by a different institution. So it's all like, I think, kind of messy, but um yeah, I have some opinions on reform. I can't say that I've like fully thought out all of like exactly what we would do if we were here to rewrite the Constitution. Someone's asking in a chat, how do we see the Supreme Court now with um G- okay, never mind. Keep going. Do you have something to add to that?
Um, when it comes to all of these changes, the thing that's really depressing, and Trump was talking all day today about like in Virginia because of the early voting, like you must do this. If the Democrats get more power and they put someone on the Supreme Court, they're gonna take your Second Amendment. But I'm like thinking about just constitutional amendments in general, the amount of pressure it would take to get any. I mean, if you know much about government or anything, if you paid attention in high school, civics, you would know it takes 2/3 of the entire country, 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 2/3 of the state legislatures to even propose an amendment. Like the amount of pressure it would take to actually implement the changes we're talking about, I think it'll never happen unless if there literally is a revolutionary type event in this country. And
Yeah,
it's really depressing.
yeah, it's really scary to think about just the kind of change that we actually need in order just to have like a society remain stable. Like, when it comes to issues about around climate change, right? Like that's we're absolutely screwed. I mean, I've mentioned to you this before, right? There's three really big issues that we've got to deal with. First, in the short run, in the immediate run, we've got to avoid nuclear war with any country because if that happens, politics is done. We're donezo. Second thing, we've got to avoid the climate catastrophe. We've got to avoid climate change. Otherwise, we're going to all boil and we're done for. Also, we've got to avoid the impending catastrophes, which is coming with artificial intelligence, which sounds like a plot from a movie, but I actually think that a lot of those concerns are really big. Now, there's a lot of sub concerns which are built into that, right? I mean, you're not going to solve the climate catastrophe if you don't solve racial justice. You're not going to solve the issues with nuclear weapons unless you solve issues around imperialism. And we have to be 100% honest about the fact that if we go to war again with two great powers go to war, that's it. We're done. It literally, we can never go to war again, and we have to be completely honest about that fact. And I don't think that there's hardly anyone anywhere in the political scene which is willing to be entirely honest about that. A war is we're done. Like we're done. Our whole planet is gone. We can't have it again, and nobody wants to be completely honest about that.
That's why, oh boy, this is such a deep topic. But when it comes to the global economy, it literally is dominoes. If one falls, everything falls. Whether it's from a war, whether it's from mass immigration because of climate change and because of the disaster we're about to witness, either we are going to throw away a lot of humanity and just tell half of the globe screw off. Basically, we failed. We're gonna have to use them as sacrifice to our faults as human beings because we just didn't do anything to stop it before it happened. Whatever the event is that decides to like create the world, create a shatter to our entire global system. We're essentially either going to throw away all of that humanity, or oh boy, or we have to. I don't even know. Like either we do that or
The
the
world,
entire system
the
crumbles
world
no matter what.
the world is a lot more fragile than people really want to admit. Our entire world could collapse very, very quickly, and we need to be completely honest about that. Like, look, we don't have to do everything right away. Like, people think that either we do things now or we do things never. No, we can work towards things, but we have to be honest about where we're going. Right? People can disagree about how we avoid nuclear war with China or how we avoid war with other major countries. Like there's, I'm sure, conservative ways to think about the problem. There's definitely leftist ways to think about the problem, but we have to think about the problem. If we're just thinking, well, we're just going to keep doing what we keep doing, well, this keep doing is exactly how we got into wars in the past. And this time we actually can't do it. We actually can't do it. And so I cannot tell you, Joey, how often I stay up late at night worried about this, like genuinely worried about this, because there are so many impending catastrophes which could occur at any moment. At any moment. Right now, conflicts between India and China are heating up. There's also conflicts between Iran and the UAE, and like these crises right now, there's a proxy war specifically going on between Iran and the UAE, which has the prospect of really heating up with involvements possibly with Israel, and that could explode very, very quickly if we're not careful. Like these are the kinds of things that we have to move in to avoid. It doesn't mean, again, that we need to all agree on how we do it immediately, but we need to be honest about the problems that we're facing. That's why I don't necessarily have I don't want to say that I don't have time for, like, I'll talk to you about it and try to persuade you because I think it's just so important. But like when people come up and tell me that global warming isn't real, I'm like, dude, like just look at the research, look at the data. I've taken some classes on this, and the professor was just like, there was one student in the class who was just like persistently neglecting the fact that this was real. And she just got so frustrated. Like, literally, look at this graph, look at that graph, look at that graph. And, I was just like, man, like this isn't college educated person who's taking this class. You know what I mean? I, I don't know. It really does worry me sometimes. In the chat, you're saying here that's why we pick wars with non-nuclear able countries. Unfortunately, that's true. Unfortunately, that is true. Generally, the only people who we try to bomb and try to exploit their resources from are non-nuclear able countries. But we need to also keep in mind, in order to maintain stability, the fact that sometimes those countries grow up. Right? You know, you pick on the bully, and then the bully grows up. You pick on you're the bully who picks up on the kid. What is it? It's a movie plot. Like the you pick up on you bully some kid, and then he grows up and gets bigger than you and beats you up. Right? You know, you have to be worried about things like that. And also, with interconnected alliances which exist today, yeah, you can bomb a non-nuclear able country, but you could also end up in a situation where that country then makes allies and makes friends with people who actually might have nuclear weapons or who are much more powerful. And also, people hold grudges, right? People hold grudges. You know, you bomb and blow someone up, blow someone's dad up. They're not going to forgive you. They don't care if the terms around it change. They're going to hold that on them for the rest of for the rest of your life. So I really think that we need to be honest about the problems that we're facing.
That's one of the
I don't know what you.
reasons I think not voting for Biden is anti-revolutionary and it's anti-human because I
Ooh,
think that
fighting words, fighting
allowing
words, fighting
Trump
words.
to maintain the bully pulpit, which in our country is one of the most powerful powers held by the president, the ability to speak and everyone listen, gives the far right so much ability to recruit people into the political process who are literally unwilling to think. It's not that people can't think. They are unwilling to think. And at a certain point in life, I guess you could say they can't because they're used to not thinking. But although you may hate libs, neoliberals, these are people that are able to think. They are able to read a graph about climate change and agree it is a problem. Although they don't agree with your revolutionary ideology, with our revolutionary ideology of a peaceful revolution right now, they don't understand why we're so mad. They can at least listen. They have the ability to listen. We need people involved and in control of the political process that care enough and have the ability to actually think. Trump right now is getting so many people in the political process that literally have the inability to process basic information and use that to create rational thought. And that is such a danger for our democracy to have these people. I mean, they were never really in this before, but with his ultranationalism, with his outward racism, with his fascist tendencies, he is able to recruit all of these people into the process. And these people being in our democracy serve as an effective block not only to our operation in a liberal democracy, but also if this revolution ever comes, there are now more people able, willing, and interconnected with other fascists that are going to be there for a counter-revolutionary stance that, guess what, isn't socialism. Almost like when you talk about Mussolini, you talk about Hitler, they all co-opted left movements, and fascism is the opposing revolutionary ideology, and allowing them to maintain the bully pulpit in general is hurting us beyond comprehension more than a liberal democracy ever could. I think that's why after Obama, we got such a big shift to the left, more than ever before in American history, because we had people able to think, able to evaluate. They knew they were seeing a crook. And after that, Hillary was nominated. They say, this is even worse than I even thought. I'm going to go join this progressive guy. He makes sense. He's addressing the problems where they need to be addressed. This has created more progress operating a liberal democracy than a third party or any abstaining vote did in the past 50 years. So you could kind of add your comments on top of that.
Yeah, look, I mean, the thing about Obama is, yes, he gave us Bernie Sanders in a certain sense because people recognize the neoliberal hypocrisy, but he also gave us Donald Trump. And I think that like, there's nothing wrong with being completely honest about that. Right now, there may very well have been racist reactionary reasons for that, but there's also the fact that a lot of people were feeling really left behind by the economic system. Oftentimes, you know, you read the scholarly literature about populist reactions, and you either get one of two approaches. You either get the approach of, you know, people who were sort of left behind um, racially, and so we're having that kind of sort of racist reaction to the Obama administration, didn't like the idea of people censoring them, and by censoring them they mean, you know, you're not allowed to run around and say the n-word or other racist things. And then other people turn around and argue, other people who are more in the materialist deterministic bent philosophically will turn around and argue that actually it's more about globalization. It's about the fact that they lost their jobs, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, you know, you've sort of heard both kind of stories, and you hear both ends of those stories. Either the kind of romantic approach of it, where it is by romantic I mean in the literary sense, where it's a question about how you feel superior or inferior relative to other races, or the deterministic materialist approach, in which those philosophical labels don't overlap perfectly, but in which you feel like it's you're railing against the weather, right? You're railing against some kind of economic system, saying stop the globalization, but you really can't quite do anything about it. But at the end of the day, I don't know that I buy the idea that there's this clean distinction between the economy and between social status. It seems like our economy ends up being a way in which we rank social stature with one another, right? We compare one another on the basis of economic gains under capitalism, and I do think that that's a problem. I think that that's absolutely a problem. But we pretend in our neoliberal society that there's this distinction between sort of social standing and between the economy, but oftentimes they really overlap. People feel left behind, and they feel like inferior oftentimes when they're told that oh well, only it's the smart people, it's the well deserving people who get their money, that they are legitimate, it's a meritocracy or things like that. And then when they didn't end up going to college, or maybe they dropped out, they feel like, well, I guess that I'm not good enough. And then yeah, you're going to get a kind of bad reaction. I don't know, there's a little bit jumbled, but um I think that we should be honest about like sort of the multiple angles in which this comes at us from.
100%. I 100% agree with that. And that's why I think we need more time. I mean, they already won this last round of, the populist vacuum opened, and one side clearly got the jump on it. One side was clearly there and ready to grab it. We are not, or we weren't organized enough yet during Obama's presidency to attack it. Like, the only left at that time really were these people that were considered fringe. And after Obama, after the 2016 election, we have become so mainstream. And I think we need to do more work on the ground and try to capture this next one. I feel like we need to instill class consciousness in more people. When it comes to talking to liberals, we need to invite people in. We need to be about addition, not subtraction. Many progressives are about subtraction. Um, we need to keep on bringing people in
Well,
so that, I mean, yeah, you could go.
I was saying, there's someone in my chat right now saying that the problem with Joe Biden defenders is that they really despise progressives. Like, I agree with you that we need to be about addition, not subtraction. But it's also the case that there are Joe Biden defenders out there who just like are genuinely like anti-Bernie and like sort of anti-progressive, progressive messaging. The thing that always pissed me off in the primary is that Democrats would always say, and I've met a lot of people like this who will always say, oh, I agree with you in principle, or I agree with you in Medicare for all in the abstract, but then in practice, we can't do it because of this, that, and the other thing. And also, I'm not even going to pretend like I support this thing. Like, look, my view on it is it's perfectly reasonable to advocate for something and then admit full well that you're not going to get there this time around, maybe not even in your lifetime. Like, there's literally nothing wrong with that. Like, just admitting, okay, I want to have universal health care in the long run, but I admit that in the next 4 years it's probably not going to happen. I don't understand why you can't do that. And we need to keep in mind, reason is a public affair. Citizens take and listen into the arguments that politicians give them, and then use the resources given to them in those arguments to form their own opinion. So if politicians start arguing for a policy, you're going to be able to see the public shift and move. So politicians, what they oftentimes end up doing is only arguing for things where it's safe, and as a result, don't end up pushing the envelope at all. Now, I understand that politicians, maybe that's not their role. Maybe that's the role of outside groups and outside institutions. But I also think that at the end of the day, you need to have a little bit of courage. You need to have a bit of guts in order to say, look, this is what I stand for in the long run. But in the short run, I support this as well. And I honestly think that voters should be and are perfectly willing and able to understand that distinction, saying, look, I support this, but this is what we're doing today. And I think that the thing that you should say you support in the long run is the most maximalist policy that you do, in fact, believe in.
Well, hot take. I think Joe Biden winning this election makes it much more likely that a progressive wins in 2024 on the basis that Obama is
You don't think
probably
Kamala Harris?
a what? What were you
Well,
gonna
I
say?
say you don't think Kamala Harris would. Let's hypothetical. Let's say Donald Trump loses and Joe Biden wins. You don't think Kamala Harris would be the pick in 2024?
I think Kamala Harris just ran one of the worst presidential campaigns I've ever seen in my life. Joe Biden is a terrible politician as well. If I had to pick
She
two
did have to drop out
neoliberals,
before
if
voting.
I had to pick two neoliberals to run against in 2024 that I think we could beat, I would pick them. That I mean, I think those are softballs. When it comes to public opinion, all fascism did was make people run back to the center. I mean, I think Bernie gets a lot more votes if Trump isn't president. If this is a different Republican, if this is someone like Mitt Romney, I think Bernie gets a lot more votes over Biden. People were afraid of Trump, and they were told and manipulated by the media, which independent media needs to keep growing, organizing needs to keep growing. They were told that Biden is the better option. Completely wrong. We all knew that, but people did come to our side. We won the battle of public opinion. We won the battle of public opinion when it comes to Medicare for all. A majority of Democrats think socialism is a good word now. That is absolutely groundbreaking in American politics. For either of the two main political parties to say socialism is a positive, like that's insane progress that we never saw before. Frankly, in modern American history, when you talk about left movements, you have the anti-war movement in the 70s. You have what people bring up as the big progressive in FDR. I mean, FDR wasn't a progressive. He was an elite establishment person. He was born into wealth, but there was a degradation of society to the point where he had no choice. Liberals had no choice but to listen to the socialists and implement workers' rights and implement programs to help workers and to help the local and to help the working class and to help unionizing. Liberals always lead towards someone further left. Jimmy Dore had a debate with Sam Cedar, and I was
Like
watching
a
it
year
again.
ago.
Yeah, in 2016.
Yeah,
The-
I just saw that one yesterday because actually I think I saw it because it was either you or Gregory who I had on a few days
Oh
ago.
yeah, yeah, I follow him now. But yeah,
Yeah,
and all of Jimmy Dore's predictions were far right
complete.
politics is gonna scare people to become far left. I'm like, where in history has this happened? And Jimmy Dore, everything he said in that debate turned out to be
Literally,
100% wrong. And now Jimmy
no,
Dore,
that's actually true. That's actually 100% true.
Jimmy
Like
Dore,
literally everything
like
he said in that debate.
he's being spread over social media yelling, "We can't bow down to the establishment. We're getting voter shamed right now. You better be pissed off." He's not using any rational and well thought out thoughts and opinions. He's not talking about this in a rational way. He's saying be pissed off at the establishment and ram your head at the wall and hope it breaks. We need to have a really measured approach at this. Hold our power. It's walk with a big stick. But what's the exact quote?
Speak softly, but carry a big stick or
Yeah,
something like that.
exactly. We need to keep gaining influence. We need to take control of one of these major parties. It's not going to help us to say we hate libs all the time, to say we hate Democrats. To 90% of Americans, liberal means left. Liberal means socialist. They don't know the distinction between liberal and socialist. They don't know liberals are right-wing ideology. We need to stop saying libs suck and instead try to bring them in. Get more and more people to side with the facts. Show them Joe Biden after he gets in the office, Kamala Harris. These are the worst
I don't.
people that represent the left ever.
Look, I don't mind saying what you really believe. I think that if you're honest and say, look, I criticize neoliberalism because of this reason, that reason, and the other reason.
Hmm.
I think that that's actually good because I think that that'll ultimately push public discourse. But I agree with you that personal insults are not productive, and people will, and by the way, not just to the people that you're attacking, but also other people watching will see that and be like, well, I don't want to be associated with that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think that persuasion is entirely rational, I mean, come on, dude. Like, I think that we figured that out hundreds of years ago, perhaps even thousands of years ago. That persuasion is not rational in that way. Like, it does require humility, it requires honesty, and honestly, yeah, it requires sometimes doing things that you don't like, and kind of getting your hands dirty a little bit. But at the end of the day, that's how you win.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, I agree with you basically.
Yeah,
But
I do agree that talking about the differentiation is a good thing, on a general basis. But we don't have the time to educate the American public. Low information voters literally swing primary elections and they swing general elections. Low information voters decide almost everything. The only way informed voters change elections is if informed voters have influence. And if informed voters are leading or organizing groups, we need to be able to craft our message in a way that the majority can understand, not in a way that we think is pure to our ideological dogma. I agree with like 99% of what people on Twitter are saying. But I think the way they present it is so counterproductive, and it
Hmm.
doesn't do a good enough job at penetrating the American mainstream. And we don't have time to wait for society to come to us. We need to find a way to use our leverage, use our power to show people that there's no other choice eventually if you want the earth to survive, than to go more left. And I think I'll have a debate with American history with anybody when it comes to left movements. America has always been a fascist leaning country. Even during the anti-war movements, a majority of the country was still. I mean, if you poll people, what was that one shooting with the guard at the one university? Kent State, was that Kent State shooting?
Kent State,
If you
yeah, where they
ask
shot a bunch
people,
of students.
yeah, if you polled the country at that point, a majority of Americans thought it was a good thing, and they thought they were just stomping down left-wing protesters that were being violent or whatever. It's the same thing happening today, the demonizing of protesters. We've always been a right-leaning nation. This is the most progressive point in history. I mean, as much as people hate that, other than trust busting and all that, in modern history in the past, well, we could just do it. We could just do since the Reagan era. Since then, this is the most momentum, the left has had.
I mean, well, I'll say this: like, you can't necessarily define the left as by a set of policies because it's all relative to how much change that they're bringing in. And
Hmm.
so, to that extent, I mean, the New Deal was obviously bringing in more change substantially, and not just materially, but also legally, building in the legal frameworks for even having any of the entitlement programs that we have and we're able to build up today. So, I don't know that I entirely agree that like it's the most progressive point in history, but I do think that the young generation has young people like our age are we're much more left. We're not we're not just immediately pro-capitalist in the way that our parents or grandparents were. We're not
Yeah.
indoctrinated by the Cold War ideology, and we grew up, post the end of history. Like I'd say that the generation a little bit ahead of me, a little bit ahead of you, grew up in hearing the rhetoric of the end of history. That this is the only ideology that can finally work. Well, now we've realized that. I mean, I woke up in the era of the dawn of history in a certain sense. I woke up in the era of post 9/11. I woke up in the era of seeing Donald Trump. That was my first election, Donald Trump. I woke up in the dawn of history, not in the end of history like our previous generations. Margaret Thatcher, of course, saying that there is no alternative, that the neoliberal liberal order is the only way to think about the world. No, history is still alive and well, unfortunately, and it's going to be hard. And even by the way, I should also add this. If history ends, well, then politics is just boring. And people oftentimes forget this. Francis Fukuyama's book, The End of History. How does it is it the end of history and the last man? That's a reference to Nietzsche. Who's the last man in Nietzsche? They're bored. They're bored out of their mind because if politics is over, if history is ended, then what's there to do besides technocratic fixes? Politics is just the economics by other means, like I was saying. That's how neoliberals view politics. It's just to maximize economic efficiency, and you're just doing technocratic tweaks. Now, technocracy in certain fields are obviously important. I don't want Joe Biden or Donald Trump in charge of the nuclear policy in terms of issues around like handling nuclear weapons. I want an expert who has like a PhD and some master's degrees and all kinds of other stuff handling exactly for instance, the transportation of nuclear wars. Obviously, you want experts in some fields, um, but point being that if we are at the end of history, then it's just technocracy. And I think that that's what we tried to see. We saw, for instance, I think it was maybe 2 days before 9/11, the chief of the Pentagon came out and basically said that we're going to be implementing various kinds of efficiency mechanisms to the Pentagon. And by that, they meant they were going to run it like a business. They were literally going to try to maximize profit. They were going to go in there and run it like a business because they were trying to implement these kinds of business like reforms throughout all of government because it was all about the maximization of efficiency along a single ideological axis. But history is returned, and it's returned with a vengeance, to use the now cliche phrase. Um, And I think that that's the era that we grew up in. We no longer believe that capitalism is the only way to do things, and that's just that idea is so freeing. Because if you think that there is no alternative to humanitarian intervention, well, then ultimately you're going to want more humane wars. We saw, for instance, during the Obama administration, that was what the whole thing about around drones were. They were like, well, we need to have wars in order to avoid humanitarian disasters, obviously. So let's use drones. That's the most humanitarian way to do it, they argued. Not, of course, excluding, for instance, the fact that a million Iraqis died because of the Iraq War, and also the fact that there's economic instability which lasts years, decades and decades. And so there is no such thing really as a humane war, and recognizing that this one economic political order is the only way, or recognizing that it's not the only way to do things, just that idea, I think, is so freeing.
Yeah. Just going back to FDR, I sort of we'd have to. This is a whole nother conversation. But what came out of the New Deal, I'm not sure how progressive it was. On a global scale, it was still pretty baseline for workers' rights and building back the economy after the Great Depression and after, obviously, the Hoover mentality that we sort of still see today. But a lot of it was gilded over economically based on the surge from World War II as well, when the country was able to mobilize into a production unit for the war effort. I think a lot of the New Deal and the develop, like if you look at a graph for production and GDP and the average income of people, I think a lot of that is looked at in a better light because you see the surge of World War II. We'd have to have a whole other conversation about this, but
Hmm.
like you were saying, when it comes to people actually saying capitalism isn't good, this is by far, and I would like even after Obama's administration in 2016, the amount of people that are being brought up right now, and I know a lot of people have more influence online, and this is what we need to keep building. The amount of people like that say socialism is good, capitalism is bad, is astounding to me, and I think that's because of we're doing things outside of the mainstream mold. We're offering independent media platforms like we try to do for the people that enjoy our content, and anyone we end up talking to in person or online or anything. We're all trying to find a way to go around this huge system, and I think we need to keep on building that, keep on using this mentality of the way things are isn't good, but we can't just kick and scream and try to get our way. Um, During the New Deal, I don't know how good it would have been if socialists weren't able to stay in the room and be willing to convince FDR. If we just said, "Oh, we're not going to help you. You're a lib. If you're not going to do a full universal healthcare system, we don't even want the new." Like, I don't think that mentality works that well. I think it's good to hold goodwill with the base of a major party, and keep on growing your independent constituency. And then when time comes, create sort of a coalition between the people within the party and without the party and or outside the party and use that to take over the party when you're ready. But right now, just this election and in the past 4 years, I don't think we were ready. I think we have a much I think we have a much greater chance in the next 4 years under neoliberalism than we do under fascism because we can't point out the flaws of neoliberalism under fascism. We're just gonna look at Trump. He's going
Right.
to make re-education systems and all this stuff, and we're going to be like, oh no, we have to get away from fascism still. I want people to be, have neoliberalism in the sights.
The thing that really moved me was the issue of climate change. Like with Joe Biden, at least he's amenable to some kind of issues on climate change, and we can't just let the world burn up. We literally have to act within the next 5 years. Seriously, if we want action, we cannot wait another 4 years and then maybe something will happen. We have to start acting now, and then we'll buy us a few more years, and hopefully we can get in and do some substantial change. And hopefully, also, we can get together with international actors. We can develop international relationships with other countries and try to get them on board with climate change because this is not just a United States problem. This is a massive coordination problem where, you have a lot of countries who just want a free ride. You have India, for instance, saying, well, look, you in the West, you got to use coal, you got to use all these dangerous fossil fuels in order to develop. Why can't we? Now you're a hypocrite. And it's true. It's absolutely true. And that's, I think, the most difficult part about it. Like they're telling you the truth. They're absolutely telling you the truth. but also we can't let the world blow up. We can't let the world burn up. These catastrophes would be far worse. And honestly, you're going to end up with massive migration waves, which probably will destabilize even those countries in the long run as well. That doesn't mean, of course, that I mean, in other words, we need to be involved with international investments for green technology in developing countries. And when I say investments, I do not mean, oh, we're going to have long-term debt relationships with these countries. I mean, like, we need to give solar panels to other countries, or train technicians in those train technicians train people in those countries, so that then they can build solar panels and start businesses in those countries.
So
Like, I swear to God, it's so difficult. Like, you can't even just begin to talk about it, because there's just so many problems that start popping up, and it's just like, but we need to start acting literally today.
so what do you say to
If we had,
I was gonna say,
go.
so what would you say to people who say no matter what, since it's such a dire need, no matter what Biden's gonna do, it's not good enough. So we should burn it all down and I mean, it's basically accelerationism. I don't know if people doing that would admit to that. But what do you say to those people?
Who say exactly what?
No matter what Biden does, it's not going to be good enough. So just burn it all down and let Trump win. Might as well let Trump win. But Biden's just not going to do enough.
Well, so to be fair, I don't think that people are saying it quite like that. I'm not sure that anyone is saying exactly those words. But you oftentimes hear the idea of, well, look, if I don't give them my vote, then they're going to come back and needing my vote, right? I agree. Someone in the chat saying that accelerationism doesn't work. Definitely, that was one of the major lessons of the Trump administration, and of the gamble that a lot of people made in 2016. And so anyway, I think that, like, the stronger argument to rebut is the claim that the Democratic Party is going to learn their lesson. Institutions don't learn their lessons. People learn lessons. People learn lessons. You do something wrong to someone, and you're gonna realize, oh, I hold on, I made a mistake that time around. I'm not gonna, maybe I can't amend things with this person, but next time around, I'm not gonna make that mistake again, or whatever have you. People learn their lessons. Institutions do not learn their lessons. Institutions act according to the incentives which they have. And so we need to talk about reshaping the institutions of the Democratic Party to make it more left leaning, reshaping the institutions in our government to make it so that it's responsive to climate change, make it so that it's responsive to concerns about avoiding nuclear war, which might be impossible entirely in a state system. Right. So we need to talk about reforming the institutions, which I do think involves active engagement in voting, so that then they don't have the incentive to do the thing that screwed you over last time. So people and institutions are different. We can't respond to institutions in the same way that we would respond to people. Because if it's a person and they screwed you over last time, yeah, I agree. Don't let them screw you over again. But we're talking about an institution. We're not talking about a person. That's
I
my
think,
that's
well,
my
most of the
60-second
people
take.
I talk to on this topic look at the individual. They look at, all I hear is Biden won't do this, Biden won't do that, Harris won't do this, Harris won't do that. But I do think it's important to look at the institutions and the two major corporations that operate as political parties in our country. It's not the figureheads that run it that matter. It's the people they're bringing in with them to work the certain facets of government, the facets of government. And I know Democrats aren't going to be a majority progressive unit, but there are a lot of progressives that were able to get a lot of power and a lot of positioning in the Democratic Party. So even having them in power when it comes to the institutional level has a lot more progressives up and down our political process. Having them in power, I'd rather have them in it than not be in it, if that makes any sense. And they'll be in, due to AOC and Bernie's mass popularity, they were able to force their way into the party because, like you said, the party's going to operate based off what it needs to do. They need to get public consent. They need to appease their corporate interests. They need to appease their geopolitical interests. They have a whole range of things they're trying to mark down on their checklist. One of those things still is voting. If what's that quote? If voting didn't work, or if what's that word? If voting didn't work, they wouldn't try so hard to get people not to vote. They wouldn't try so hard with voter suppression if voting really didn't work. So I think the vote does still matter. They still have to fight for our vote and everything, and that's why right now with around 3% of the country that will go green and 1% of people on the left that will go libertarian. I saw a poll. It was one poll had Biden and Trump in it. Biden was at 52%, Trump was at 41. This is only one poll, but with Joe Jorgensen and Howie Hawkins included in it, Biden's numbers actually went down 4 points, and Trump's went down one. And Jorgensen polled at 5, Howie Hawkins polled at 2 in that poll. I think a lot of people on the left are going to vote libertarian too, because they do overlap in some areas. Libertarian is technically a left ideology at the baseline before it was manipulated. That's a different conversation. But I think if we were going to do the strategy like you said, they're trying to do like, oh, they have to come to us, they're going to come back to us and learn their lesson. I think in order to do that, if you wanted to say that could work, I don't know what number you would put it at, but I think you need to have a bigger chunk of the country's electoral base to force the Democrats' hand. If you had 15-20% of the party who would literally
Right.
abstain from voting if the Democrats don't go more left, that works. But I don't think we're in that position.
Right. It is possible. You're right to point out there that you can reshape incentives by realigning votes, for instance. Right. That's obviously like a major incentive for the institutions. But the thing though is in the long run, right, you don't want them to just go back to like as soon as right, say you manage to get a third party and you manage to get a coalition of about 10% and they're all Democratic Party. They're gonna try to woo you this election, but then you break that next election, they're gonna go back to doing exactly what they were doing previously. So my thought is, well, if you want long-term fixes, then you should engage with the party, reform the institutions, reform the incentive structure, for instance, reformulate the way in which they take money, maybe have various kinds of filters so that even the people receiving the money don't know where the money's coming from. You can do that actually very easily in the short run. That's a very short run solution that can help. In again, in the immediate short run, long term solutions are much more drastic. That can reshape the institutions so that then they're more responsive to Democratic voters and will move the institution left. And then from there, you can reform things. And from there, obviously, I do think that we want to have some kind of third party option in the country in the long run. I support a more parliamentary style of government. I would probably support a I was mentioning earlier that I supported between the two of whether or not to have a upper house, which is essentially like the House of Representatives. I probably lean a little bit more towards the unicameral system, where it's just like basically a unilateral parliament with 50% of the vote, and then you have a prime minister who's essentially the executive, and combine the legislative and executive branches together while separating the sort of functional and sort of foreign policy procedures of the president. So you'd still end up with three branches, but the branches would be different. Um, the only hesitancy I do have to that, I should say, is the incentives of casework. So I don't know if you've ever done any kind of casework for any like politician or stuff like that. But casework can be like really helpful, right? Like being able to contact a representative, especially local representatives, and be like, I need help with this now, and that they're, someone who can write laws is actually quite important. And if you're only voting for a party as opposed to voting for specific representatives, that can kind of impede that a little bit. So anyway, if we're talking about long term adjustments that you can make to shift the Democratic Party and shift the country overall, so that then in the long run we're talking about left wing, I think that there's some debates about exactly where to go. Because I think that casework does have some value, but it's hard, I suppose, to weigh it.
Yeah, I agree. When you look at the different factors that make up each system, at the bottom you have to pay attention to the individual, and at the top you have to pay attention to the institution. I think that's sort of where we're getting to. Like Biden, you don't really care about him. He's not really doing anything. He's just going to be the figurehead. But when it comes to the local level, when it comes to your state representatives, when it comes to your, who's going to be in the House from your state, who's going to be in the Senate from your state, that matters more at the individual incentive. I mean, we're seeing it right now with the Supreme Court issue, how these different Republicans are going to be switching their vote based on what's going to help them, like Susan Collins right now being pressured by moderate Dems in Maine, and whoever else has incentives. Yeah, I think we definitely agree on that. And I'm probably going to call it a night then.
Okay. Did you want to talk? I don't know. I don't know if you already cut it off, but did you want to talk at all about the distinction between what was it that you were asking me about earlier?
Oh, the distinction between, you'll have to give me a little bit of
I
a
know
reminder.
you had texted me about the distinction
Okay.
between voter shaming and um between voter shaming and God, what was the phrase that you used?
Yeah, and actual positive discussion. So basically, I
Yeah.
was saying we should differentiate between voter shaming and having a discussion based on issues. So I saw a lot of people saying like to someone saying like Biden is better than Trump because 20 million more people have healthcare and stuff like that. And then the response being stop voter shaming me. But I think it's important to differentiate between voter shaming and honest
And having
discussion. Like
a
just calling
honest
someone
discussion.
stupid because they're voting Green Party and not addressing any of the actual points and just saying this is why you got to do it because this is how things
Mhm.
work and you just got to bow down to the two-party system. You have to stop being a little petulant child. Like that's voter shaming. But if someone comes up to you with actual concerns, then that's not voter shaming. They just want to initiate a good faith discussion. It's really just the difference between good faith and bad faith, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tricky one though, because whenever you're talking politics, there is a connection between politics and sort of moral philosophy and between morals, right?
Oh,
Like
sure.
if you say that helping the climate is good, then how are you, in a certain sense, not blaming someone for not doing the thing that you think is going to help the climate the most, or whatever it is? If you think that, say that you're pro life, for example, you're on the right and you're talking about abortion, right? Like they often say, oh well, I'm not shaming you for getting an abortion, but you're also turning around and saying that abortion is murder. So like, I don't know how much I agree with you that voter shaming is avoid like, look, voter shaming is a very, I suppose, I don't know if polarizing is it's a nuclear word, right? But I just don't know that there's like this clean distinction out there. Like,
So are you
it
saying
seems to
voter
me that
shaming isn't real or that everything is voter shaming?
I would use a different word. I would use a different word. I know you're trying to go, so I'm not gonna hold you
Oh no,
up.
we can
But
talk about it if you
um,
want. It's not a big deal.
oh well, I was just gonna say that like it seems to me that like anytime you engage in a good faith argument with someone, that's good, right? And it's up to the other person. I don't know that it's up to like, look, it's up to the actor not to do ad hominems, right? Like if you're having a conversation, don't do ad hominems. Try to engage in a good faith manner. But at the end of the day, I think that it's going to come up to the person receiving the concerns or the criticisms, what have you, to not interpret that as voter shaming. I don't know that it's something that is quite in the ballpark of the person initiating the concerns. I don't know
So,
if you agree
so
with
it is
that.
more about a good faith or a bad faith argument that I personally feel it should be judged by. I don't want people to run away from a good faith actor by saying there's voter shaming, but if you could tell they are bad faith, in their argument, I guess you could say it's more of a shaming thing. If someone's literally saying, yeah, I agree with you, about like if someone says like, oh, I don't. I don't. Oh boy, like you said about like abortion, or if they say something about someone being gay, like it's okay if you are that way. I just think you're a reprehensible human being for being gay, or something like that. Um, then that would okay. Yeah, I agree. So I just want to do it by good faith and bad faith arguments then instead of voter shaming. That's a good
Right.
term, but it's
Well,
just so hard to talk about this because there is.
well, it's difficult. It's difficult to know what constitutes a good faith argument. Or, well, good faith argument might even be wrong. It's difficult to know the things that go into having an honest conversation, because oftentimes it requires you to not only be an honest person, but it requires you to express your views clearly. But that requires practice. So, for example, oftentimes the strongest formulation of an argument is not always the actual formulation of an argument which you hold. I'll give a little bit of a humorous example. I believe it was St. Anne's College in Oxford, or maybe it was Cambridge. For a long time, they held the view that basically, for the dorms, boys are not allowed. Basically, for a really really long time, it was an all girls school. I might have the name wrong, but essentially, it was a girls' school, and they didn't allow guys into the dorms. And then when they decided to change the rules, a bunch of the nuns and sort of older people involved were basically like, okay, well, the only way that we're going to allow it, they started essentially voicing concerns about the mattresses. They say, well, if boys come in, then it's going to, like, it's extra property damage. They're going to use water. They're going to damage the beds. They're going to, damage the apartments, damage the furniture. And so as a result, they made a compromise, and the compromise ended up being, okay, well, you can pay 5 pence a night every time you have a guest stay over. And it was gender neutral, but it was like this would okay, well, this is gonna go into the funds to help the damage, but obviously that wasn't their actual concern. They just didn't want guys to stay over because they were worried about sex, right? But that was the kind of concern that they felt uncomfortable voicing, and so they tried to formulate their views in a kind of utilitarian fashion because they thought that that would be a stronger formulation of the argument. But clearly, that's not the actual concern that they had. And so that's a super bizarre example. But it's, I think, a point being that when we try to have a conversation with someone, part of being honest is not just expressing your views, but also expressing your views clearly. And I worry that requires practice. That requires understanding yourself, first of all, why you actually hold the views that you hold them, which I think sometimes it's very easy to deceive yourself. But also, it requires a level of clarity and rigor in argumentation, which is very difficult to achieve. That I don't think I've achieved, that I don't know many people who have achieved beyond perhaps Supreme Court justices or the like, you know? Having very clear and rigorous arguments is, I think, an art. I don't know that it's always a and how do you collapse an art into a moral failing, right? Like, is someone morally bad because they're not able to explicate their arguments in a rigorous fashion? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm just pushing back on you a little bit, but um, if you want to have this conversation, but
Yeah,
um,
that's an interesting
it's
example, and I mean that's almost possible to do on the internet, especially considering what we know about interaction online.
considering chat box and stuff like that. But no, I just wanted to raise that concern because it's something that I worry about a lot, honestly. It's something that I think about when when I hear comments from like '08 and like the early aughts about how the internet is going to usher in this better age of democratic discourse by allowing everybody to comment on all the news videos and things like that. You read reports from the New York Times how they were allowing like a comment section for a little while to like increase democratic discourse. And it's like, does it really though? Because you've constrained their ability to respond. And it seems as though the ability to respond and have a rigorous argument for your position is included in the ability to have a good faith argument. Because again, if you collapse your argument or misunderstand the reason why you actually believe things and argue something wrongly, then you're going to be those nuns who, convince themselves that for a compromise that they're happy that the girls had to pay 5 pence a night or the boys had to pay 5 pence a night in order to sleep over at the dorms. Which, by the way, just a year later they ended up removing the fines because everybody knew that it was completely ridiculous. But and of course I picked out that example specifically because it's the most sort of explosive and exaggerated example of this, but I think that we do see this every day, especially when it comes to the pro-life pro choice debate. And I think that we see it throughout our democratic discourse, where oftentimes the strongest formulation of our argument is not the reason why we actually believe something. And you can collapse that into honesty, and it is, but it's also about ability to self-reflection, but also an ability to have rigorous arguments, which I think requires certain kinds of training in certain disciplines that, quite just being perfectly honest, most people not only don't have, but don't have the time for. And so I wonder, obviously, like I do completely support everybody who wants to try, but it does seem to me that like asking for honest discourse is actually a much bigger ask than people even really want to admit. But with that, I know you have to go. So
Um, when it comes to social media and democracy, I think that's a good point to make because it doesn't really help a democracy just for everyone to be able to participate. It matters to the extent of which they can participate and represent their own issues, their own arguments, and how much they are able to evaluate their own position in that society and what works best in their own interest and their social and class interests. And social media takes away that ability from so many people. And like you said, it's so hard to do that even with years and years of practice. And even if you know how to, know your own arguments, to be good at speaking the proper rhetoric is a whole nother level of difficulty.
and
And
oftentimes speaking the rhetoric can go against being honest about why you actually believe something, because if you're trying to engage in a good faith debate with someone and then say they completely rebut your arguments and then you come along with another set of arguments, and to you maybe you genuinely thought that the arguments that you gave before were your actual reasons, but I think sometimes logic can deceive ourselves. and that's where things start getting really difficult. We start moving down an infinite regress.
Yeah, I think these conversations are really fun. Like it's not just politics. It's really digging into like moral philosophy and your self-actualizing
Yeah.
opinion of what you think and then how you think other people are perceiving your argument. And it's really good to talk about this when considering voter shaming
It's a
is such a
debate
big
about
topic.
Right. It's a debate about the nature of rationality and how that intersects with democracy. These really deep, abstract philosophical debates that have been going on for a long time and actually have made substantial progress in the past, I'd say 50 years, are actually really, really important for helping us know how we should be building a democratic society moving forward. So, these tricky debates that seem really obscure are actually really important. And we should, try to cultivate at least some of those debates somewhere. Not all the
So this
time, but
is this is a hard
occasionally.
question,
All right.
but just one
What?
final question to end on.
Okay.
What advice would you give to not only people who are trying to convince people to vote in a certain way, but also to the people uh, who are being approached with this intent?
What do you mean?
So,
Just
like, what's your advice? Like, how would you tell people to approach convincing other
approach
people?
arguing with people. So, are
Yeah,
we talking to people who are on the right, or are we talking to people who
just very
are?
specific to the current issue we're facing with people more in the center, people more trying to get Biden elected, trying to convince third party members to vote Biden.
So, I think on the right, it's going to be really important to mention. I think first of all, I'll say this. I can speak from experience. I've grown up in a very sort of evangelical kind of background, Christian background, but I've moved left. But obviously, I wasn't raised that way. Just about my entire social circle is still like very conservative in that respect, in the evangelical respect. I think that actually you can appeal to them on the life issue and pointing out how life is not just you're right because they're oftentimes they're pro life and you probably can't persuade them on that. But you can talk about issues of immigration and you can talk about issues of hold on, why don't kids have health care? Like you care about them all the way until they're born. Why is it the case the United States has very high infant mortality rate? Like how can we modify those things? What kind of issues on healthcare can advance that cause? I found that people who are pro-life are actually very persuadable on those issues specifically. If we're talking about centrist voters, I think that it's a let's suppose that you're a centrist and you're disinterested. You just don't really care about politics. I think that you can tell them literally just explain things about climate change and about nuclear war. Right? But I think that the one that can really activate people actually is the artificial intelligence one. That's why I've been bringing it up a lot more because it's not seen as a specifically policy debate. It's not seen as something that goes on in politics all the time. But if you engage in politics that way, something that they don't think of as politics, maybe you can get someone interested in it. Because artificial intelligence, I mean, that's a cool conversation. You're talking about AI, you're talking about robots taking over the world. But talk about how those things that are looming on us are going to require a policy response and are going to require certain actions either from the government or from corporations or whether it's the government modifying corporate rules to control algorithms or to control the ways in which artificial intelligence and robots are going to be taking jobs, that these things are policy concerns. You might be able to activate someone to go out and vote and start being like, okay, hold on, these are actual real issues. This is a reason for me to get involved in politics. Show them something that involves politics that they haven't associated with politics in the past. If you're talking about someone who's maybe a leftist and who isn't necessarily keen on pro Biden, maybe is going to go vote green or something like that, or is going to sit out, but they're a leftist or a
And
socialist. I think that climate change is the one to go to. I think that talking about climate change and saying basically, look, the world is boiling, right? I think there was a report coming out basically that if we don't act in the next 9 years for climate change, we're going to require a 9% drop in emissions per year for about 30. 9% global, not just America. I'm going to be 100% honest with you, Joey, and everybody who's watching here. 9% per year for the whole world, like that's just that like you talk about pie in the sky, like we're really talking about pie in the sky. You're going to get developing countries to commit to these massive cuts. I mean, you're really messing around. That's why I'm saying this climate change thing is really we're on an exponential trend. You remember the exponential graphs where it's shooting up. So we've got to start acting really, really, really quickly. And even just a little stop break in terms of climate change for a couple years, those 4 years between Trump and Biden is huge. And so that's how I would approach that issue. The centrist who's an well, let's not call them centrist then. The moderates who are activated voters who are probably going to go out and vote, but they're on the fence. Maybe they don't like Trump's mean tweets, but they're basically Republicans in other respects. I think that actually just pointing out Trump's indecency is useful, but also maybe targeting a little bit about Trump's flagrant violations of the law, and also how he's been cramming in judicial appointments, and also maybe point about a little bit of the hypocrisy around Merrick Garland. I think that those kinds of appeals probably do work towards moderate voters who are actually engaged in politics already. So I think that it's a different step for every single voter, and I think that that requires getting to know people. But it's difficult. Someone's asking real quick here. I know that was the last question. I don't know if you wanted to give your take, but someone's asking here. I don't know if you're taking questions, but what do you think of the concept of permanent revolution? Um, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by permanent revolution, but I do think that constantly fighting to get what you want in is a good thing, but I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the concept of permanent revolution.
Isn't that
Uh,
the unwillingness to work within any framework and literally just saying, without compromise, I'm going to be fighting for this, and whoever is in your chat can respond. Is permanent revolution literally just like, no matter what, we are fighting for this one ideology and trying to get people with this ideology, and we will not compromise it with any position?
okay, so they said permanent revolution is the strategy of a this is a I guess a quote from some article. Permanent revolution is the strategy of a revolutionary class pursuing its own interest independently of and without the compromise or alliance with opposing sections of society. So part of leftism that will always be pushing for further change. Um, I don't agree that you're gonna get anything done without compromise. However, if you're talking about, like, a small contingent constantly promoting their values, um, yeah, I mean, like, look, like we were saying earlier in the stream, I don't know if you were here earlier, I think that's pronounced M in Lotus. I'm not exactly sure how to say that name, I'm sorry. Um, like we were sort of saying earlier, there's nothing contradictory with espousing your actual views and saying that actually I'm a socialist or I'm, an anarchist, whatever, like I'm super far left. But in the short run, we're trying to save the planet, or in the short run, we're trying to do this, that, and the other thing, and we're compromising to get those short run goals done. People are capable of understanding that you couldn't get everything you wanted. I think that we learned that from a young age. Sometimes you want two cookies, but there's only one cookie left on the pan, and so you have to share it with your brother or sister. Like we all kind of we all know how to do that, and people are plenty capable of understanding that distinction. I don't see how it's any more revolutionary or any more left leaning to not compromise with anyone. Um, he's saying, I guess you can consider it the true polar opposite of ultra right literal Nazi types, those ultra left anarchist revolutionary or death types
Okay,
like
I think he
Dave.
knows. So in the conversation we were just having, these would be the people that would be like, "I'm unwilling to work within this framework. We should not. The Bolshevik of this society will never bow to our desires because the proletariat, their power is far too strong. It scares them. So no matter what, we need to fight for this, even if it
Right.
means revolution, because revolution is the only way we're going to get socialism." Is that what you are saying, Emmett Lotus, or even Lotus? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he's saying that it's basically like the opposite of literal right Nazi types. So, one thing that I would suggest, I don't know if you agree with this, Joey, but I don't think that like being more reactionary in your politics, or maybe reactionary is the wrong word because that can also have ideological connotations, but being less compromising, for instance, or being more dramatic in your views or how vocal you are has anything to do with your ideology. I think that that has more to do with personal temperament. Just because you're saying more vocally that you don't like compromise or that you're not going to work with the libs does not make you more left than someone who is saying, okay, I'm willing to engage in politics and work with someone. Your ideology is about the actual things that you believe, which is again distinct from the temperament of it. He's saying, personally, I find massive worth in the idea because it enables bargaining weight against the permanent tradition, conservatism forces in the world that seem massively dominant right now, you know. Um, I hear what you're saying. That's certainly definitely a very common position which a lot of people have. Um, I don't know if you were here for this part of the stream, but my view on it is that institutions don't learn lessons. And I hear your point there about adding a kind of bargaining weight and right, like saying that you're going to withhold your vote or that you're going to do this, that, or the other thing. But at the end of the day, institutions don't learn lessons. You're not going to teach an institution a lesson by not voting for them and then they lose an election. You might be able to do short run things by propping up a third party and then changing the incentives for this election for them to go left or the like. But at the end of the day, you want to reform that institution so then it has different incentives, so then it moves left or that it moves whichever way you want. Right? I don't think that you're not going to teach the Democratic Party a lesson. The Democratic Party didn't learn a lesson by losing to Donald Trump. They didn't learn a lesson, right? The certain people might have learned a lesson, but that's going to require those people who learned lessons to go in and reform the institution and then reform the incentives of the Democratic Party so that it is more responsive to voters and less responsive to wealthy individuals. And that, in the long run, or even really in the medium and possibly relatively short run, will make it so that the politicians who run and win for office from the Democratic Party are not those corporate centrists that we've been seeing. So, um, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my take on that. I don't know what you think,
So I
Joey.
have a question for you a little bit. Do you read theory?
What do you mean read theory?
As in theory, I just mean do you read like Trotsky and Lenin and stuff to look for uh I guess inspiration?
So right now we have a book club on Wednesdays at 7:30. It's The Conquest of Bread. We're reading Peter Kropotkin's book Wednesdays at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. So we are reading through The Conquest of Bread, which is an anarchist book right now. I'm reading it over with Chris Frederick of Political Perspective. Um, but in terms of reading leftist theory, I'm going to be honest with you. I've generally avoided leftist theory for a very long time. I mostly read philosophy and not always political philosophy. Like I'm interested in politics, but my bigger interest is actually in physics and philosophy of science and in that direction. So if I'm being honest, that's where I spend more of my time as opposed to reading the news, which sometimes, in all honesty, clogs up my brain. So I do read political theory, but I don't actually necessarily read leftist theory, which I think is really good that I'm doing this book club now, and will hopefully after this be reading other books, getting a better grasp of leftist theory. Because I'll be honest, I'm generally unaware of most leftist theory, but I actually am I was just looking. I actually do have quite a few books, and I've read quite a few books in political theory, but mostly in Enlightenment era political theory or in ancient political theory. I can't say that I've read a ton in contemporary or modern political theory. Although I should qualify that, of course. I suppose Marx is a thinker, but I've read part of Capital, but only a little bit. I've always been more interested in just reading the people who are more sort of more influential in the general philosophical tradition, because that's sort of what I'm just personally more interested in. But I do think that getting more familiar with leftist theory is a good move in the medium run, long run.
I found the well, not passage, but I found the original statement from Trotsky on permanent revolution. So, he describes it as the permanent revolution, in the sense which Marx
Ooh.
attached to this concept, means a revolution which makes no compromise with any single form of class rule, which does not stop at the democratic stage. It goes over to socialist measures. It does not stop at the democratic stage. And it goes over to socialist measures and to war against reaction from without. That is a revolution whose successive stage is rooted in the preceding one and which can only end in complete liquidation. So it's essentially skipping all of the steps to get to socialism. It's saying that we could just have a permanent revolution. We could skip all those steps and just have a complete, left society.
Hmm.
So yeah, interesting.
I doubt it. I would need to definitely read more closely into that quote and the context of that quote because he could be talking about how he doesn't need to see um like obviously Marx had like a specific scientific theory for how, history was going to proceed based on Hegel and sort of materials dialectics. Um, I don't know. I would have to read the context of that quote specifically to know exactly what he was referring to by the idea that we could skip the
Oh,
skip the
I have some
stages.
context. So the first idea had is that a backward country does not need to pass through the same sequence of stages already achieved by advanced countries. So I'm not sure how that would apply to the U.S. then. Um, would that mean backward? We'd have to know, does that mean backward in a material sense, or does that mean backward in an ideological sense? And does advanced mean? Yeah, definitely we'd have to read into it more. But anyway,
That's going to be referring to the mode of production,
yeah, okay.
because Russia was closer to a feudal system. They had parts that had industrialized, but it was much more feudal, and they had still sort of peasants that were controlled by essentially kings, at the time, or at least before the first revolution.
All right. Well, next stream will be about neo feudalism. All right.
Okay, okay.
All
All
right.
right.
Good talk.
That'll be it for the stream. Yeah. Thanks guys so much for hanging out. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll be back again in a few days to have another chat, likely with Chris Frederick, and then we'll hopefully be back again with Gregory Hardin the second, once again with the Green Corn Rebellion show. Hopefully we'll get you back in again as well, Joey. So if you haven't already, make sure to hit the follow button. Make sure to hit the follow button. Thanks, guys, so much for the engaging conversation in chat and for hanging out. Well, really appreciate it. Love all of you guys. See you next time around. Peace.